A homeless man walks into an expensive bakery with only 75 cents in his trembling hand, hoping to buy just one slice of bread to survive. Another day, but what happens next will restore your faith in humanity because the single mother CEO who owns this bakery does something that changes both their lives forever. And you need to hear this story because what she discovers about this man will shock you, and the twist at the end will leave you speechless, so stay until the very end. Because this is not just another feel-good story, this is about destiny, karma, and how one simple act of kindness created a chain reaction that transformed an entire community, and when you find out who this homeless man really was, you will understand why everything happens for a reason. So let me take you back to that cold November morning when everything changed. It was a cold November morning in Seattle when Marcus stepped through the glass doors of Sunshine Bakery located in the heart of downtown on Fifth Avenue, and the smell of fresh bread and pastries hit him like a warm embrace, reminding him of better days when he had a home, a family, and a purpose in life. But those days were gone now, and all he had left was 75 cents in his pocket and a hunger that had been gnawing at his insides for 3 days straight. Marcus was 52 years old, but looked at least 10 years older, with a weathered face covered in gray stubble, wearing a torn jacket that barely protected him from the Seattle cold, and his shoes had holes in them that let the rain seep through, soaking his feet every time he walked, and he had been sleeping under the bridge near Pike Place Market for the past 8 months, ever since he lost everything. The bakery was beautiful inside, with warm lighting and wooden tables, and the display cases were filled with golden croissants, chocolate muffins, blueberry scones, and rows of artisan bread that looked like they belonged in a fancy magazine. And Marcus felt out of place immediately because everyone else in the bakery was dressed in business suits and expensive coats, holding their smartphones and fancy coffee cups, and here he was looking like he had just crawled out of a dumpster. Behind the counter was a young woman with kind eyes who looked about 30 years old, with her hair tied back in a neat ponytail, wearing a simple apron over her clothes, and she was helping customers with a warm smile that seemed genuine, unlike the fake smiles Marcus had grown accustomed to seeing when people looked at him with disgust and pity. Marcus approached the counter, slowly keeping his head down, because he did not want to draw attention to himself, and he could feel the other customers staring at him with their judgmental eyes, wondering what a homeless person was doing in their nice bakery, and he wanted to turn around and leave. But his hunger pushed him forward. When he reached the counter, the young woman looked up at him, and instead of the disgust he expected, he saw genuine warmth in her eyes, and she smiled at him the same way she had smiled at the businessman who ordered before him, and she said, "Hello, sir, what can I get for you today?" And her voice was so kind that Marcus almost started crying right there. Marcus cleared his throat and said in a raspy voice that came from not speaking to anyone for days, "I only have 75 cents, and I was wondering if I could get just one slice of bread, please. Just one slice would be enough." And he placed his 3 quarters on the counter, and they made a small clinking sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence, because everyone in the bakery had stopped talking and was now watching this interaction. The young woman looked at the 3 quarters on the counter and then looked back at Marcus, and her expression did not change. She did not look disgusted or annoyed or impatient, and instead she said, "Sir, would you please sit down at that table over there?" And she pointed to a table near the window, and Marcus was confused and said, "But I only have enough for one slice, and I can wait here." And she smiled again and said, "Please sit down, eat first. We will figure out the payment later." Marcus did not understand what was happening because nobody had been kind to him in so long that he had forgotten what kindness felt like, and he stood there frozen until she came around the counter and gently guided him to the table by the window, and she pulled out a chair for him and said, "Please sit, I will bring you something," and her touch was gentle, like she was helping a grandfather, not a homeless stranger. Marcus sat down and watched as she went back behind the counter and started preparing something, and the other customers had gone back to their conversations, but he could still feel some of them glancing at him and whispering, but he did not care anymore because something strange was happening, and he did not understand it, but he was too tired and hungry to question it. 5 minutes later, the young woman returned to his table, but she was not carrying one slice of bread. Instead, she had a tray loaded with food. There was a bowl of hot soup that was still steaming a large sandwich filled with turkey and cheese, a side salad, a cup of coffee, and 2 pieces of chocolate cake, and she placed it all in front of Marcus and said, "Here you go. Please eat as much as you want." Marcus stared at the food in disbelief and then looked up at her with tears forming in his eyes, and he said, "I cannot pay for this. I only have 75 cents." And she smiled and said, "I know, but you look like you need a good meal more than I need 75 cents, so please eat and do not worry about payment right now. Just eat and get your strength back." Marcus wanted to argue, but his body betrayed him, and he grabbed the spoon and started eating the soup, and it was the most delicious thing he had tasted in months, and the warmth of it spread through his body like liquid sunshine, and he ate slowly at first, trying to maintain some dignity, but then his hunger took over, and he ate faster, unable to stop himself. As Marcus ate, the young woman went back to serving other customers, but she kept glancing over at his table to make sure he was okay, and some of the other customers were watching too, and Marcus could see different reactions on their faces. Some looked touched by what they were witnessing, while others looked uncomfortable, like they did not want to see poverty in their fancy bakery. When Marcus finished eating, he felt human again for the first time in months, and he sat back in his chair, feeling the warmth of the food in his belly, and the coffee had cleared his mind, and he looked around the bakery, really seeing it for the first time. And that was when he noticed a small photograph on the wall near the counter, showing the young woman who had helped him, standing in front of the bakery, holding a ribbon and a pair of scissors, and underneath the photo it said, "Grand Opening, Sunshine Bakery Owner Sarah." Marcus realized that the woman who had fed him was not just an employee. She was the owner of this entire bakery, and she had used her own food and her own money to help a homeless stranger without hesitation, and this realization made the tears finally spill down his cheeks, because he could not remember the last time anyone had shown him such pure kindness. Sarah came back to his table and sat down across from him, and she asked, "Are you feeling better now?" And Marcus nodded, unable to speak because of the lump in his throat, and she said, "Good. I'm glad." And then she did something even more surprising. She introduced herself properly. She said, "My name is Sarah. Chun and I own this bakery, and I want you to know that you are welcome here anytime you need a meal." Marcus finally found his voice and said, "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. I'm nobody. I am just a homeless man who came in here begging for bread." And Sarah looked at him with those kind eyes and said, "You are not nobody. You are a human being who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And besides, I know what it is like to struggle. I know what it is like to be hungry and desperate." Then Sarah told Marcus her story, and he listened in amazement as she explained that she was a single mother with a 6-year-old daughter named Emma, and that she had opened this bakery just 2 years ago after escaping from an abusive marriage with nothing but her daughter and a dream, and she had worked 3 jobs while going to culinary school at night, and she had saved every penny for 5 years to open this bakery. Sarah said there were times when she and Emma were so poor that they ate nothing but rice and beans for weeks, and there were nights when she cried herself to sleep, wondering if she was making the right choice, wondering if she should give up and go back to her abusive husband, because at least then Emma would have enough to eat. But she never gave up, and she kept pushing forward, and eventually she opened Sunshine Bakery, and it became successful beyond her wildest dreams. She told Marcus that she named it Sunshine Bakery because even on the darkest days she tried to remember that the sun was still there behind the clouds waiting to break through, and she wanted her bakery to be a place of light and warmth for everyone who walked through those doors, and that included people like Marcus who were going through their own dark times. Marcus was crying openly now, and he said, "I used to be somebody. I used to have a life. I was an architect. I designed buildings. I had a wife and 2 kids. I had a house and a car and a future." And then Sarah asked gently what happened, and Marcus told her his story. He explained that 15 years ago, he was at the top of his career working for one of the best architectural firms in Seattle, and he had just finished designing a beautiful community center that was going to serve underprivileged neighborhoods, and he was so proud of that project because it was not just about making money, it was about giving back to the community. But then his wife Karen was diagnosed with cancer, and everything fell apart, and the medical bills piled up faster than he could pay them, and his insurance Company found loopholes to deny coverage, and he had to sell their house to pay for treatments. And he took out loans and maxed out credit cards and did everything he could to save her, but it was not enough, and Karen died 3 years after her diagnosis. After Karen died, Marcus fell into a deep depression, and he could not work anymore, and he could not focus on anything, and his kids were teenagers, and they were angry at him for not being there for them emotionally while he was drowning in his own grief. And eventually they went to live with Karen's sister in California, and they stopped calling him and stopped visiting, and Marcus did not blame them because he had failed them as a father, his family, and without his career Marcus had nothing left, and the debt collectors came after him, and he lost everything, and he ended up on the streets, and that was 8 months ago, and he had been surviving day by day ever since then. When Marcus finished his story, Sarah was crying too, and she reached across the table and held his hand, and she said, "I am so sorry for everything you have been through." And Marcus said, "Thank you for listening. Most people look at me and just see a homeless drunk, but you actually see me as a person." And Sarah said, "Because you are a person and you matter." Then Sarah made Marcus an offer that would change his life, and she said, "I need help here at the bakery. My business has been growing, and I cannot keep up with all the work by myself, and I need someone who can help me with the early morning baking and someone who can handle the maintenance and repairs around here, and I cannot pay much to start, but I can offer you a job if you want it." Marcus could not believe what he was hearing, and he said, "Are you serious? You would hire me?" And Sarah said, "Yes, I am serious, but there is one condition. You have to promise me that you will work on getting back on your feet. You have to promise me that you will try to reconnect with your kids and get help for your depression." And Marcus said, "Yes, I promise I will do all of that." Sarah said, "Good then. You start tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. And Marcus said, "But I do not have a place to stay. I live under a bridge." And Sarah thought for a moment and then said, "There is a small storage room in the back of the bakery. We can clean it out and put a cot in there, and you can stay there until you save enough money to get your own place, and it is not much, but it is warm and dry and safe." Marcus broke down completely at this point, and he put his head in his hands and sobbed because he had forgotten that people like Sarah existed in the world, and he had forgotten that there was still kindness and compassion and hope, and for the first time in 8 months, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could survive this. That afternoon, Sarah closed the bakery early, and she and Marcus cleaned out the storage room, and they set up a cot and brought in some blankets and pillows, and Sarah even went to the store and bought him some toiletries and a change of clothes, and Marcus kept trying to thank her, but she just smiled and said, "We all need help sometimes, and today I'm helping you, and maybe someday, when you are back on your feet, you will help someone else." The next morning, Marcus showed up at 5 a.m. sharp, and he was clean and shaved and wearing the new clothes Sarah had bought him, and he was ready to work, and Sarah taught him how to prepare the dough and how to operate the ovens and how to make the different pastries and breads, and Marcus was a quick learner, and he threw himself into the work with an intensity that surprised both of them. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and Marcus transformed before everyone's eyes, and he gained weight, and his face filled out, and the dark circles under his eyes disappeared. And more importantly, the light came back into his eyes, and he smiled again and laughed again, and he became a beloved fixture at Sunshine Bakery. The regular customers got to know Marcus, and they loved him, and he would chat with them while preparing their orders, and he would remember their names and their usual orders, and he brought a warmth to the place that complemented Sarah's vision perfectly, and together they made Sunshine Bakery feel like more than just a place to buy bread. It felt like a community. Marcus also kept his promise to Sarah, and he started seeing a therapist to deal with his depression and grief, and it was hard work facing all those painful emotions he had been running from, but he did it, and slowly he began to heal, and he also reached out to his kids, and at first they were hesitant and hurt and angry, but Marcus was persistent, and he called them every week, and he wrote them letters, and he apologized for shutting them out after their mother died. It took 6 months, but eventually his daughter Jessica agreed to visit him, and she flew up from California with her younger brother, Tom, and when they walked into Sunshine Bakery and saw their father healthy and clean and working and smiling, they broke down in tears, and they all hugged and cried together and began the process of healing their broken family. Sarah watched this reunion from behind the counter, and she cried happy tears because she knew what it meant for a family to be broken and to find their way back to each other. And she thought about her own daughter, Emma, who was thriving now that they were away from her abusive father, and she felt grateful for the journey that had led her to open this bakery. But the story does not end there, because something extraordinary was about to happen that none of them could have predicted 1 year after Marcus had first walked into Sunshine Bakery. Everything had changed, and he had been promoted to assistant manager, and he had saved enough money to rent his own apartment, and his relationship with his kids was strong again, and they visited him regularly, and he was even dating someone, a kind woman named Linda, who worked at the library down the street. Then one morning a man in an expensive suit walked into Sunshine Bakery, and he looked around with an appraising eye, and he approached the counter where Sarah was working, and he said, "Are you Sarah Chun, the owner?" And Sarah said, "Yes, I'm. How can I help you?" The man introduced himself as David Morrison, and he was a senior partner at one of the biggest architectural firms in Seattle, and he said, "I have been hearing wonderful things about your bakery and about the work you do in the community, and I wanted to meet you in person." And Sarah was flattered but confused about why an architect would care about her bakery. Then David said, "I am here because of Marcus Thompson," and Sarah's heart skipped a beat, and she said, "What about Marcus? Is he okay?" And David smiled and said, "He is more than okay, but I need to tell you something about him." David explained that Marcus had been one of the most brilliant architects in Seattle before his life fell apart, and that the community center Marcus had designed 15 years ago had become a model for a community-focused architecture across the country, and that David's firm had always regretted losing Marcus and had been looking for him for years, but he had disappeared, and they had no idea what had happened to him. Then David said, "Last week I was having coffee with a client, and I overheard two women talking about this amazing bakery that hired homeless people and gave them second chances, and they mentioned a man named Marcus who worked here, and I thought, could it possibly be the same Marcus Thompson? So I did some investigating, and I found out it was him." Sarah listened in amazement as David continued, and he said, "I came here today to offer Marcus's job back at our firm with a senior position and a salary that reflects his talent and experience, and I also came to thank you because you saved the life of one of the most talented architects I have ever known." Sarah called Marcus from the back, and when he came out and saw David Morrison standing there, his face went pale, and he said, "David." And David walked over and shook his hand and said, "Marcus, it is good to see you looking so well." And then David made his offer right there in front of everyone. Marcus was stunned, and he looked at Sarah with tears in his eyes and said, "I do not know what to say." And Sarah smiled and said, "You should say yes, Marcus. This is your dream. This is what you were meant to do." And Marcus said, "But what about the bakery? I cannot just leave you after everything you have done for me." Sarah laughed and said, "Marcus, you have given me so much more than you realize, and you have helped me build this place into what it is today, and now it is time for you to go back to doing what you love." And Marcus said, "Are you sure?" And Sarah said, "I am absolutely sure." So Marcus accepted the job, and he went back to architecture, but he did not forget where he came from, and he worked with David's firm to design a new project, a large mixed-use building that would include affordable housing, a job training center, a community kitchen, and on the ground floor a second location of Sunshine Bakery. Marcus also insisted that the building include a shelter and support services for homeless people, because he knew firsthand how hard it was to get back on your feet when you had nowhere to go. And David agreed, and they got funding from the city and from private donors, and they broke ground on the project. 6 months later, the day they broke ground on the new building, there was a big ceremony with city officials and news cameras, and Marcus stood at the podium to give a speech, and he told the story of how he had walked into Sunshine Bakery with 75 cents, hoping to buy one slice of bread, and how Sarah had said, "Sit down, eat first," and how those simple words had saved his life. Marcus said, "We live in a world where people are quick to judge and quick to ignore the suffering of others, but Sarah showed me that one person's kindness can change everything, and she did not help me because she wanted recognition or praise. She helped me because it was the right thing to do, and that is what this building is about. It is about creating a place where people can get second chances, where they can find dignity and hope and purpose." Sarah was in the audience holding her daughter Emma's hand, and she was crying as she listened to Marcus speak, and when he finished everyone stood up and applauded, and Marcus invited Sarah to come up to the podium, and he said none of this would exist without this incredible woman, and he presented her with the architectural plans for the building, and there on the front page it said Thompson Chun Community Center, named after both of them. The building took 2 years to complete, and when it opened it became a model for how cities could address homelessness and poverty with dignity and compassion, and in the first year alone the Thompson Chun Community Center helped over 500 people find jobs and housing and get back on their feet. Sarah opened her second Sunshine Bakery location on the ground floor of the building, and she hired people from the job training program to work there, and she kept her promise to pay it forward, just like Marcus had kept his promise to pay it forward. And together they created a ripple effect of kindness that spread throughout the entire city. Marcus reconnected fully with his kids, and they were incredibly proud of him, and Jessica even decided to study architecture like her father, and Tom became a social worker who specialized in helping homeless veterans, and they both said they were inspired by their father's journey and by Sarah's kindness. As for Sarah, she expanded Sunshine Bakery to 5 locations across Seattle, and every single one employed people who needed second chances, and she never forgot where she came from, and she never stopped believing that everyone deserves dignity and respect, no matter their circumstances. 5 years after that cold November morning when Marcus first walked into Sunshine Bakery, Sarah and Marcus stood together at a fundraising gala for homeless services, and they were both being honored for their work in the community. And during her acceptance speech, Sarah said, "I did not set out to change the world. I just wanted to run a bakery and treat people with kindness. But what I learned is that small acts of kindness can create big changes, and if everyone did one kind thing for one person, the world would be a completely different place." Marcus stood up and hugged Sarah, and he whispered, "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." And Sarah whispered back, "Thank you for reminding me why I do this." And everyone in the room stood and applauded, and there was not a dry eye in the house. The moral of this story is simple but powerful, and it is that we never know who we are helping when we show kindness to a stranger, and that homeless person asking for help could be a talented architect, a brilliant teacher, a gifted artist, or someone who will change your life in ways you cannot imagine. And we should treat every person we meet with dignity and respect, because we are all just one tragedy away from losing everything. Sarah often tells people that the day Marcus walked into her bakery with 75 cents was the luckiest day of her life, because he taught her that success is not measured by how much money you make, but by how many lives you touch. And Marcus says that Sarah gave him something far more valuable than a job. She gave him back his humanity and his hope. Today, Sunshine Bakery is thriving, and the Thompson Chun Community Center has helped thousands of people get back on their feet, and Marcus is designing community-focused buildings all over the country. And Sarah is training other business owners on how to create inclusive hiring practices, and both of them are living proof that one act of kindness can change everything. And it all started with 3 quarters on a counter and 4 simple words: sit down, eat first.